Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the Lulu Essey podcast. I'm Lulu, and today I'd like to begin by asking you something important. What if your most profound healing happens when you stop allowing your trauma to write your story? You are so much more than the worst things that have happened to you. Before we dive right into this final part of our trauma and healing series, please share this episode with someone who might be carrying more than they're letting on. These conversations change lives, and sharing helps us reach more people who need to hear this message. If you've been with us for this entire journey with Hawa Who from keepcalm.org, thank you for walking this path with me. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. This episode stands on its own, but I encourage you to go back and listen to parts 1 and 2 when you have a moment. There's profound reframing there that might shift your perspective. I also wanted to remind you that this series of 3 episodes is part of an interview I had with Hawa back in April, which was recorded while I was in my own mental health crisis. Allow me to briefly share what we've explored so far. In part 1, we discovered that trauma isn't just the big obvious events. It's any experience that overwhelms our capacity to cope, and it becomes the invisible architect of our inner world. We explored how it lives and stays in our nervous systems, which are built for resilience. In part 2, we dove deep into building emotional resilience through tiny, consistent actions. It's what I call my tiny way to big impact that creates real, sustainable change. And we also explored some tools and self-care practices you can use daily to help you cope in the moment. Today, in part 3, we're talking about reshaping your narrative without erasing your truth, how to honor what happened while refusing to let it define your entire narrative, and how to build a community to support you. Before we begin, I'd like to reiterate that everything I share comes from my personal lived experience with mental health challenges and my own healing journey, specifically with bipolar disorder. While I've really educated myself extensively on these topics, I am not a clinical professional. This is my trauma-informed path to healing, and I share it in the hopes that it might illuminate something for you. In terms of Hawa and the work she does, organizations like keepcalm.org matter deeply because they create community and advocacy spaces where lived experience and emotional wellness support intersect. There's room for all of us in these conversations, clinicians, advocates, and those of us sharing our own journeys. Each perspective adds something vital to the tapestry of healing. And as you listen today, I invite you to reflect. What parts of your story feel like they've been written for you rather than by you? How have you let your story define you, and what is possible for you? Where do you think you may be able to expand into new meaning, new community, new ways of belonging, without losing the truth of what you've lived through? And who is one person in your life that could be part of a healing community with you? So let's step into this final conversation about the most profound transformation of all, moving from this trauma is who I am to this trauma is part of what shaped me. Let's talk about becoming.
And so you have the free will to touch on whatever you want to touch on and just close the session with some kindness or anything you want to share with the audience, whether it's a quote or some words of encouragement.
Sure, sure. So, I do want to say a little bit about building a community. I think that is really important, but I think it's important for people to realize that community looks different ways for different people. It doesn't have a specific form, and especially when we are in a vulnerable place and we feel challenged with our mental health, it's hard to trust. And I want to draw the distinction between trust and love, because sometimes when we're struggling, they're different. And we can love somebody deeply and profoundly, but they might not be the right person for us when we're struggling, because they might feel a need for us to be fixed or to fix us. What I feel we need are people who can just be with us and be with our pain and just let it be what it is without trying to fix us. And community can be one person. And I think that's important for people to know. It doesn't have to be a group of people. It can be one person that you trust. And I think your safety is the most important component of a community. And I think in closing, there's something, it's a little delicate, but I want to touch on something important. And that is the stories that we tell about our trauma. Because there's a delicate balance here that I feel is often overlooked in healing conversations. Yes, I acknowledge that there are times when speaking about traumatic events is necessary and it is healing. But there's a point that we need to be mindful of, that those don't become our stories. Because when we over-identify with our trauma stories, we unconsciously and inadvertently anchor ourselves to that pain. The trauma becomes not just something that happened to us, but it becomes who we are. And that's where healing can stall. You know, I think part of the healing journey involves acknowledging the stories because they're real, but not letting them define who we are and what's possible for us. And again, it's holding that truth of what happened while also recognizing that we are so much more than the worst things that have happened to us. And as we heal, we can begin to reframe these stories, not by changing or denying the facts of what occurred, because the facts are the facts, but by articulating our experiences in more empowering and loving ways. And this is not about forcing positivity or pretending that the trauma wasn't deeply, deeply painful, but it's about shifting from a story of victimhood to a story of empowerment. And that's the true place of healing. And this transformation in how we relate to our stories is where our real freedom begins. We move from being broken by our trauma to being expanded by it, finding our capacity for compassion, compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, finding our capacity for connection, and honest living. And that actually, it deepens because of what happened and because of what we've endured and survived. So the story of our trauma doesn't disappear, but it becomes just one chapter in a much richer, more magical, more interesting, diverse, complex story of who we are becoming. And that shift from this trauma is who I am to this trauma is part of what has shaped me is one of the most profound transformations in healing. And there are so many quotes that I love. But I think the one in this context that I hang on to and just brings me such comfort is something that Dr. Wayne Dyer said when he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's so layered and so it's got so many. I mean, we could unpack that for an hour, but it's just a really beautiful quote.
Oh, that is so beautiful. Yay. Oh my goodness. This is just so nice. You know, I can listen to you talk about this all day long. Because I mean, I'm very passionate about mental health and I like to hear other people's insights. I sit with myself a lot, to just hear my thoughts.
That's
So when and this is a very good topic because when I discovered, you know, it's not very much spoken about in my community, like the African community. It's not touched upon very much. Majority of Africans just look at it as though like you're being lazy, you're complaining when you talk about, oh, it's because of my mind. Something's happening with my mind. And so you like subconsciously just, you know, start going about that same route. And all I had was my thoughts, honestly, when I was growing up, because no one believed that, you know, there's something going on with you mentally. You're just being lazy. So, I think I mostly dove really deep into mental health in 2018. When I was like, no, there's no way something's actually going on. And it was just like this entire hole of like, whoa, there's so much to mental health, you know? Like there's a lot to it. And I've never like looked back ever since. So it's very nice to, you know, hear you speak. It's almost like a podcast, honestly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
This series has been about one fundamental truth. You are not broken, and healing is possible. As Hawa beautifully shared, these conversations matter because they create space where lived experience and healing wisdom can flourish, especially in communities where mental health isn't always openly discussed. The words I shared by Dr. Wayne Dyer, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, capture everything this series is about. It's not about denying what happened. It's about expanding how we hold it, and that expands who we are and what is possible for us. Your trauma does not disappear. It becomes just one chapter in a much richer, more magical, more complex story of who you are becoming. You move from being broken by your experiences to being expanded by them. Your capacity for compassion, for connection, for honest living actually deepens because of what you've survived. You become able to acknowledge and to feel that you are so much more than the worst things that have happened to you. Share the series with the people you love and care about. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not broken, they are not alone, and that healing is possible. Text it to a friend, post it on your stories. Let's start a conversation. These messages ripple out in ways we cannot imagine. My deep and heartfelt gratitude goes out to Hawa for inviting me to have this conversation with her. And I would love to hear from you. What shifted for you in this series? What's one insight you're taking forward? Reach out to me, lulu@luluessey.com, or find me on social media. Let's keep this conversation going. And just a reminder, if you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2, I really encourage you to go back and have a listen. There's so much wisdom there about redefining trauma and building resilience that will support your own journey forward. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and share these episodes. And a review on your favorite podcast platform helps more people find these conversations when they need them most. And it takes less than 2 minutes. Remember, you are not broken. You are becoming. What comes from the heart reaches the heart. And today, with deep respect for your courage to rewrite your story while honoring your truth, this comes straight from my heart to yours.